A map is an amazing thing for a fantasy world. You can tell so much about the lands just by looking at it. Mountain ranges, rivers, forests, deserts, coastlines, the political boundaries of the world, magical items, incredible geography. And it's often the first thing you see, right there in the front of the book. But from a world builder's perspective, a map can also be a trap. Why? Well, most readers assume that physics and geology work the same way in your world as they do in ours, unless you tell them otherwise. So, when they look at your map and they spot something that breaks the rules of geology, they'll assume it's magical or fantastical. But what if it's not? What if you just made a mistake? Then the very first thing they encounter in your world is a map that doesn't quite make sense. And that can break their immersion before they've even reached the first chapter. How do you prevent that? Easy. Make sure your map follows all of the rules, except where you intentionally break them for magical or narrative reasons. But you need to know those rules to break them. So today, let's explore the 9 facts you must know about geography to create a realistic map. Welcome to another episode of Just in Time Worlds with your host, Marie Mullaney. So let's start with a big one. Plate tectonics matter. Plate tectonics is all about how large sections of the Earth's crust move and interact. They're constantly shifting, and over millions of years they form mountain ranges, valleys, and other major landforms. Understanding plate tectonics is one of the most critical aspects of world building, because it explains why your mountains are where they are, why continents look the way they do, and even why your world has earthquakes and volcanoes. Given its importance, let's spend a few moments understanding the basics of how plate tectonics actually works. Plate tectonics is like a big jigsaw puzzle made up of huge pieces of the Earth's outer shell called plates. These plates are constantly moving very, very slowly. Sometimes they push against each other, sometimes they slide past each other, and sometimes they pull apart. When they push together, they can form mountains like the Himalayas as the Earth is pushed upwards. This can, of course, also cause earthquakes. When they pull apart, they create volcanoes or new land masses, like the Mid-Atlantic Ridge, as the Earth is pulled apart and magma wells up. Over millions of years, this movement shapes the land, creating valleys, islands, and even entire continents. Think of the Earth's crust as a cracked eggshell, where each piece is slowly moving on this conveyor belt, and the shape of the world is very, very slowly changing as the pieces of egg crust interact. Without plate tectonics in your world, it would be flat and pretty boring. So what you want to do when you're designing your world is you want to go down to that bottom layer of the plate tectonics and sketch out your plates and how they move, in which direction. It doesn't have to be pretty. No reader is going to see your tectonic map. All you want is a very basic sketch to help understand the forces that shape your world, creating valleys and mountains and land. And don't forget, You can use these tectonic forces in fantasy as well. It's your world. You can do all kinds of crazy stuff. For example, in the Tamuli series by David Eddings, The Bell Home, a powerful magical artifact was used to raise a cliff by manipulating tectonic forces. That kind of powerful change could leave your characters dealing with massive earthquakes and aftershocks for decades. And it shows how magic can interact with the fundamental forces of your geographic and geological shapes in a fantasy setting. So, make sure you understand how the eggshell of your world is cracked. And let's move on to fact number 2. Water flows downhill. This might seem self-evident that water flows downhill, but it's more important than it looks at first glance. Rivers are vital to cultures throughout history. Think of how many ancient civilizations thrived along rivers, like Egypt on the Niles, or Mesopotamia between the Tigris and Euphrates. Rivers mean transportation, water, irrigation, resources, and food, all of which are essential for settlements to grow into civilizations. But rivers don't just pop up anywhere. They follow the contours of the land, which are shaped by plate tectonics and erosion. Knowing where rivers naturally form on your map and where they flow to can help you figure out where your most important cities and cultures are likely to develop. Let's take an example. China's Yellow River, often called the cradle of Chinese civilization, starts high up in the mountains of Tibet and snakes through the northern parts of China. Its constant flooding due to the buildup of sediment, hence the yellow color, created incredibly fertile land. This was perfect for growing crops like millet, which was a staple food of early Chinese settlements. However, this same flooding also caused destruction. The river would often change course dramatically over time, forcing entire communities to adapt. This led to the development of sophisticated irrigation and flood control systems as early as 4000 BCE, which played a massive role in the growth of Chinese civilization and bureaucracy. The challenges and rewards of living near the Yellow River helped shape the resilient, centralized bureaucratic systems that would become the hallmark of China's imperial history. So, the physical shape of the river, combined with its flooding cycles, directly impacted where people lived, how they farmed, and how they organized their society. And that is something to keep in mind when placing rivers in your world and dotting your settlements beside them. A great example of how rivers influence culture, even pre-agriculture in fantasy, is from the Earth Children series by Jane M. Auel. Jondlar, one of the main characters, travels along the Mother River, meeting different people and cultures all the way along the river. And all of these people harvest food and other resources from the river long before the permanent settlement of agricultural societies. The river is a lifeline and a roadmap for his journey, and it connects the vast pre-agricultural world. Because of course it is much easier to follow a river downstream than upstream, because water flows downhill and people have been building rafts since they figured out that wood floats. So consider the flow of your rivers and where that would place settlements that grow into cities in your world. And let's move on to 3. Climate zones matter. One of the key factors in determining a region's climate is its latitude, how far north or south it is from the equator. As a general rule, areas closer to the equator tend to be warmer, while areas near the poles are colder. But why? Why is this true? It's basically all about the sunlight. Near the equator, the sun's rays hit Earth directly, meaning more energy is concentrated in a smaller area. And that is why equatorial regions are warm and often tropical, and when it's excessively hot, tend towards desert. As you move towards the poles, the Earth curves and the sun's rays spread out over a larger area. This means less heat is absorbed, which makes the poles much colder. On top of that, polar regions tend to have ice and snow, which reflect the sunlight instead of absorbing it, making these areas even colder. So, when designing your world's climates, it's useful to think about where your equator and poles are. If you have a standard spherical planet like ours, areas near the equator should be hotter with jungles, deserts, or tropical rainforests, while regions near the poles should be colder with tundra, glaciers, or frozen wastelands. But now remember, you don't have to stick to Earth's exact rules. You can absolutely tweak these dynamics for storytelling purposes or fantasy purposes. For example, in a fantasy world, maybe your equator is magically cold, or perhaps your poles are warmed by an enchanted sun that shines beneath the pole. Or perhaps there's underground volcanic activity at your poles. You could also introduce magical phenomena like floating icebergs in a tropical sea or scorching deserts near the poles, as long as there's a reason within your world's physics. And that's the secret to all these rules. You need to know them so you can break them on purpose and by design rather than by accident. However, if you're keeping it realistic, remember that latitude affects climate, and that impacts where different cultures, animals, and plants will thrive. You can create compelling contrasts between tropical, temperate, and polar regions to give your world richness and diversity. And if you need specific inspiration for the kinds of environments that would exist at different latitudes and potential biomes that would exist there, check out my playlist on world building specific biomes in the information card. Alrighty, that was 3 down, 6 to go. If you're enjoying the video so far, go ahead and give it a thumbs up while we discuss number 4. Wind and ocean currents influence weather. Wind and ocean currents are huge players in the world's weather patterns. Ocean currents can carry warm or cold water over long distances, which affects the climate of coastal regions. For example, a warm current might make a northern coastline much milder than its latitude suggests, while a cold current could create colder, harsher conditions near the equator. Also, winds pick up moisture from the oceans, primarily warm oceans, and carry it across the continents, delivering rainfall to some areas while leaving others dry and arid. This interaction between wind and water helps shape where deserts, forests, and fertile plains will be in your world. And we will talk more about that phenomena in a little bit, but first, don't forget about tides. Tides are primarily driven by the gravitational pull of the moon, and they affect everything from fishing to trade and coastal ecosystems. If your world has multiple moons, the tidal forces could be much more dramatic than ours, leading to stronger currents or even unpredictable tidal surges. And if you want to explore the idea between multiple moons and how they can influence geography, magic, and culture, be sure to check out my earlier video on multiple moons and their impact on fantasy world building in the information cards. But let's get back to deserts. Have you ever noticed in our world that deserts tend to be on the west coast of continents? There are a couple of reasons for that, including the cold ocean currents of like the Humboldt Current along the west coast of South America, the California Current along the west coast of North America, and the Benguela Current along the west coast of Africa. These cold currents cool the air above them, reducing the ability to hold moisture. So remember when I said the wind picks up? It doesn't pick up from these cold air. As a result, when this cool, dry air moves inland, because it hasn't picked up moisture, this creates arid conditions. Now, we've got this cool air going over the land. But as the air warms when it moves over land, it further absorbs moisture. But since there's very little to absorb over the land, the area remains dry, contributing to the desert conditions. So basically, these cold ocean currents that seem to run on the west coast all the time cause that strip of land right next to them to be a desert because the flow of wind over them doesn't pick up moisture from them and then flows over the land and sucks even more moisture out of the land, and there just isn't rain. But that is not the only reason why deserts form. You can also get deserts because of rain shadows. So let's talk about rain shadows next. Mountains don't just look cool on a map. They have a massive impact on the climate and the cultures living around them. One of the most important ways mountains affect the environment is by creating rain shadows. So here's how that works. When moisture blows in from the ocean, it hits the mountain range and is forced upward. As the air rises, it cools, and this cooling causes the moisture to condense and fall as rain or snow. That's why the windward side of a mountain range is often lush and green with forests or fertile farmlands, thanks to the steady rainfall of the warm ocean air bringing moisture to the land. But by the time the air crosses over the mountain to the leeward side, most of that moisture is gone. This leaves the land dry, creating desert-like conditions in the shadow of the mountains. And this is exactly why deserts like the Atacama in South America, which is one of the driest places on Earth, can exist so close to a coastal region. In my world of Sangwheel Chronicles, I've drawn on the natural phenomena of both the cold current and the rain shadows to create a desert culture living in the rain shadow of a massive mountain range called the Arm of the Gods. Yes, a single arm for multiple gods. It's my world. I'll call it weird stuff if I want. Bite me. The nomadic people of the Sidon Mashada Desert have adapted to the harsh, dry conditions of their world. And just to make things even more interesting, they have tamed these giant snakes called Masuroxi, who hunt stingray-inspired poisonous creatures called the Yanari. Because what is a desert if you can't even put giant snakes in it, right? If my world sounds interesting to you, check out the books on the links down below. So, when building your fantasy world, think about how your mountain ranges can shape entire ecosystems and the cultures that arise in those regions. Maybe a fertile, rain-soaked kingdom lives on one side of a mountain, while nomadic desert tribes struggle to survive in the arid lands on the other side of the same mountain. And speaking of ecosystems and mountains, let's talk about fact number 6. Biomes and ecosystems vary by altitude. Altitude is another crucial factor that can dramatically change a region's ecosystem. As you go higher up a mountain, the temperature drops, the air becomes thinner, and conditions get harsher. This means that the plants and animals that thrive in the lower, warmer elevations of the mountain often can't survive as you climb higher into the cold, oxygen-poor environment near the summit. This creates many biomes on a single mountain. For example, the base of the mountain might be covered in lush, tropical forests, while further up you'll find temperate forests with pines and deciduous trees. Higher still, the environment could shift into alpine tundra with tough, scrubby plants, and finally, at the very top, you might have snow-capped peaks where nothing lives. A stark, icy environment where you cannot even breathe. These shifting biomes aren't just about the flora and fauna, they also shape the cultures that develop in high altitude regions. A great real-world example of this is the Kingdom of Lesotho, a landlocked country in southern Africa known as the Kingdom in the Sky. Lesotho is the only independent nation that lies entirely above 1,000 meters, that's 3,281 feet, in elevation. The rugged mountainous terrain has deeply influenced the Basotho people's way of life, from their architecture to their blanket-clad attire designed for the cold, harsh climate. The isolation caused by the altitude has also helped preserve their distinct culture and their independence. You try invading a country where the entire fight is uphill and see how far you get. This kind of vertical diversity can make your fantasy world feel richer and more alive. For instance, imagine a hidden valley high in the mountains where an isolated culture has developed, adapted to the thin air and extreme conditions, cut off from the rest of the world below. Or perhaps the peaks hide a dragon's lair, or a forgotten temple to an ancient god, reachable only by those brave enough to scale the treacherous heights. So, when designing mountains in your world, think about how the different elevations can create distinct ecosystems and how those ecosystems can shape the cultures of the sapient beings who live there, each with their own challenges and adaptations to their environment. And this will add depth to your world and offer a range of environments for your characters to explore and interact with in a single mountain range. 2/3 of the way through the list. Have you learned a new fact today? Let me know in the comments which of these you knew and which you learned for the first time today. Fun fact, commenting on a video is the best way of making the algorithm show the video to more people. So, for every commenter, thank you very much for your engagement and support. Okay, let's push on to fact number 7. Islands are born from volcanic and coral activity. Islands can add a lot of character to your world's geography, and they're typically formed in two main ways. One, through volcanic activity, or two, through coral reefs. Volcanic islands like Hawaii are created when underwater volcanoes erupt, gradually forming land masses over time as lava cools and solidifies. Volcanoes, of course, being caused by plate tectonics, all these things do work together. Anyway, these islands often have dramatic landscape with towering mountains, lush jungles, and even active volcanoes that could play a key role in your story. On the other hand, coral islands, like those in the Pacific, are formed from coral deposits building up over millennia. These islands are often low-lying, with beautiful lagoons and intricate coral reefs teeming with marine life. And in that biomes playlist I referenced earlier, there's a whole video dedicated just to coral reefs and their formation, if you need some inspiration for such an island. There's also a video all about islands and the weird life you find on them, because islands can be a fantastic source of story conflict. Their isolation breeds unique cultures and customs and fauna and flora that is often very, very different from the mainland. A chain of islands might serve as a natural barrier to trade or as a strategic stronghold for naval powers vying for controls of the seas. Wars could be fought over these island territories, or they might be home to an elusive culture with rare resources, or they might be a place where specific magical entities live, or creatures that are naturally adapted to the magic of the island. So think about what islands exist in your world and how the species on them have evolved differently and what the cultures are like that have grown in these islands in isolation from the mainland, and how these islands have developed, whether by volcanoes caused by tectonic plates or by the coral equivalent of your world building up these coral islands. Naturally, islands have shorelines. And that brings us to fact number 8. Fjords, bays, and peninsulas add detail to coastlines. When you're mapping out your coastline, fjords, bays, and peninsulas can add so much variety and realism to your world. Fjords are steep, glacially carved inlets. Think of the dramatic landscapes of Norway, and they provide natural harbors perfect for both trade and defense. The high cliffs around fjords offer natural protection from attackers, making them ideal locations for strongholds or bustling port cities. Bays serve as safe havens for larger ships, allowing your sailors to take shelter from storms or to launch raids from hidden coves, while peninsulas, lands that extends out into the sea, can act as strategic choke points or homes to unique cultures that have developed separately from the mainland and controls the ocean in the sea around them. An excellent example of these kinds of coastal features being used very effectively in fantasy is John Gwain's The Bloodsworn Saga, where Viking-like cultures live in settlements carved into rugged coastlines. The sea plays a critical role in the characters' lives, and their towns are often nestled in natural harbors or along perilous stretches of fjords where their ships are key to both survival and power, and they even have dances that they perform on these ships. These kinds of environments are not only visually stunning, but they also deeply affect the way these seafaring people live, fight, and trade. So when designing your coastline, consider how features like fjords, bays, and peninsulas can influence the cultures that inhabit them. Fjord-dwelling raiders might rely on longships to launch quick attacks, while island-based traders could use bays as crucial stops along their trade routes. And trade is a critical component of cultural development. It's how ideas are exchanged and goods are moved. So consider where you place your natural harbors, and remember that a lot of the time a natural harbor equals a settlement developing there in that harbor. And don't forget about peninsulas either. These land extrusions might be the seat of a powerful kingdom, controlling vital sea lanes that others must pass through, making it a hotbed of intrigue and conflict. I mean, Rome is on a peninsula, and it controlled a massive empire from there. So you have plenty of historical precedent to draw on in terms of the importance of peninsulas. And finally, let's talk about fact number 9, the impact of glaciers on geography. During an ice age, glaciers act like massive natural bulldozers, carving out deep valleys, flattening plains, and depositing fertile soils. These massive rivers of ice are incredibly powerful, and they reshape entire landscapes as they slowly grind their way across the land. And when they finally melt, glaciers leave behind a distinct mark on the terrain, often creating features like lakes, fjords, and even moraines, ridges of debris left in their wake. Now, in Finland, for instance, where I live, the land is still decompressing from the weight of the glaciers that once covered it during the last ice age. And this gradual rebound of the earth is known as isostatic rebound. Basically, the land got squished by all the ice on top of it, like a kilometer of ice on top of it, and it's now decompressing at the speed of rocks. So this is something you could incorporate into your fantasy world. Maybe certain lands are rising from the sea, opening up new territories, or even revealing ancient ruins hidden for millennia beneath the ice. Glaciers also play a major role in trapping and releasing resources. As they retreat, they can expose rich mineral deposits or even uncover fossils or long-lost civilizations preserved in the ice. These kinds of discoveries can spark conflicts over who controls these newly exposed lands or the resources they reveal, be that gold, precious gems, or even magical materials that have lain dormant beneath the ice for centuries. And if you're building a world where there are glaciers that dominate the landscape, you might want to consider something like George R. R. Martin's ice wall in A Song of Ice and Fire. Now, in that wall, the massive wall of ice serves as a physical and symbolic barrier separating the known world from the dangerous, untamed world. And it's a magical construct, but a glacier a kilometer high could similarly create a natural barrier between regions, separating potentially hostile nations, or guarding ancient secrets, or creating an isolated magical community living on top of the ice. So whether you're crafting a frozen frontier rich with untapped resources, or a forbidding icy wasteland like Martin's Land Beyond the Wall, glaciers offer plenty of opportunity for storytelling. And like with plate tectonics, their impact on the landscape is incredible in terms of what they create on your map, like your fjords and your lakes. So those are the 9 geographic facts you need to know to create a realistic map for your fantasy world. Of course, this is all my opinion, and if you fundamentally disagree with any of my facts or think I've missed any, there is a link to my Discord server where there's a whole community of world builders to argue with about these facts, and there's a link to that down below. If you like what I do here and you want to support the channel financially, you can join the channel right here on YouTube, and for the price of a cup of coffee a month, you can enjoy all kinds of cool perks like members only live stream and early access to videos And shout-outs like this one to Aya, Tiffany, Patricio and Dylan of the Build It in Wood level, and Lupex, Katie and Tony, just-in-timers of the Build It in Stone level. But don't feel obligated to support the channel financially. You can also show your support just by watching another video. And since you enjoyed this video, maybe check out my video on how to create the history of your world. And I will see you soon for another episode from Just in Time Worlds, where we build what we need when we need it.